You're listening to Supply Chain Unlocked. Get exclusive insights from industry leaders on overcoming.
Welcome back to Supply Chain Unlocked. This is part 2 of our generational engagement series, where we stop talking about labels and start talking about execution. Today's episode digs into why generational friction persists in supply chain environments, especially as remote work, accountability, and leadership expectations continue to shift. Once again, I'm joined by Tom Brouillette, a former colleague of mine and an operator who's lived through these changes from the inside. This conversation is about what leaders need to change, not what employees need to tolerate. Tom, let's get into it. Let's get to the first discussion
Thanks.
point. Any comments before we get started there? It's kind of steamrolled you.
No, that's fine. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Let's jump in.
All righty here. Career path expectations have fundamentally changed. What do we mean by that? Well, younger talent doesn't see supply chain careers as a linear ladder. What do you think about that, Tom?
I think that's accurate. I wonder if that's kind of baked into their long-term approach. They're still in, and what I mean by that is that they start a job. Yeah, it seems neat. It looks kind of neat what you're doing. Let's see how it goes. And then if it continues to maintain their interest, then they may stay. But I think the days of we're looking to hire somebody for the next 20 years are gone. They're over. You can't count on that. It's something because of the nature of the job market. I believe that it's a good thing for both sides, really, because it requires both sides prove on a regular basis rather than, oh, look where I'm going to retire from. And I think that concept of I'm going to work here until I retire, really, I think that's an intimidation factor. I think I think they hesitate over that because they're not looking at the long term. Remember, they've lived through the pandemic, they've lived through the quarantines, they've lived through the ups and downs of the job market. They like the idea of working remote. It gives them some freedom to actually do the work when they're most suited to it. And then to add to that, this is something I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. It takes some time to evaluate that option. And that's fine. I think that companies need to look at it now when you're hiring somebody. The long-term employee is getting to that 3 to 5 year average. And I've actually talked to some HR people and recruiters that agreed with that. It's much shorter than originally thought. You're not, that question, where do you see yourself in 10 years? The easy answer for these Gen X would be, well, not here.
Yeah, Gen Z.
Yeah. And the problem is that now you've got the people that are in charge, the leaders who are from a different generation, and that's their everything that they look at things through that lens, through that filter. That's why you get a lot of companies saying, well,
Yeah,
it's return to the office because I like to have everybody here. So you were going to say something. Sorry.
yeah. So that's a no. You're fine. Just to reiterate, why younger talent doesn't see supply chain careers as linear ladders. For me, I wouldn't even say younger here. It's just talent. It doesn't matter what your age is. I think there's a lot of people of all ages from 20 to 60 that we have so many options to jump and go to something else. And one reason why we do is pretty simple. There is so much leadership turnover that you can't plan on the leadership that's in place this year is going to be in place next year.
Right.
So it's this fragmented thing. They're not buying your loyalty in most of these companies like they did in the past, where you had team building exercises, you had dinners that you went out to with your group or your team, or you had like kickoff dinners when you were starting a new distribution center. All of that, or even Christmas parties. When was the last time you had a Christmas party, Tom?
Well,
1998.
no, the company I'm with right now, they actually have a nice Christmas party every year, but that is a small company that doesn't, they're not going to have hundreds of people at a nice place. It's 30.
Yeah. So my whole point there is this is not a generational thing. a linear ladder. And I think it gets into a conversation of will you get out of the supply chain space? And I think I don't know that you'd get out of the supply chain space as much as you would be moving around in the supply chain, meaning you might be working through a 3PL here or a
Right.
transportation company next. But
Right.
I think you still stay within the industry.
And because there's so many different aspects of the industry, you are continuously changing your job and your roles, and that can keep you interested. So there is absolutely that, but I think that the whole market from a employment perspective is changing as well, because I think of the supply chain. Let me just digress. I think of the supply chain as essentially a piggy bank that the business uses in order to quickly get a return. I am going to change my last mile transportation because I save X millions of dollars over 5 years. I'm going to put in this piece of automation and it's going to reduce my expense by X amount. Um, that the employment market has shifted over the years as well. It wasn't that long ago that the major companies, even not even just the major companies, it wasn't that long ago when companies didn't had an entire industrial engineering department where they would actually sit down and design these things and understand and do process improvements and things of that nature. And now, with the vast majority of companies have moved to the easy example, WMS software, you don't have that figuring out anymore. You're essentially configuring the solution based on how you handle it or how you think you're going to handle it. But you don't have that staff that has that deep experience. It's different. And so that kind of changes your work. You can still move around, but you get more, there's kind of a personal satisfaction of learning something sometimes. And I think you get more of that solving a significant problem in the management consulting side of things.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing that affects a lot of people in this whole
Mhm.
how is it fundamentally changed? One, with the ability to go find other jobs or find other employees, it allows you to essentially move quicker. And what people figured out and doesn't isn't talked about a lot is the whole what I call 3 to 5%. If you're a person that you're happy with 3 to 5%, great. If you want to become a manager, the best you're going to do is about 10% to be the manager on the team or whatever teams. And then if you're going to go to a director level, you might get another 10% more, 12%. But if you want 15 to 20%, you just move companies. And I think that is where you're not of why we just constantly have this turn and burn of employees, not just on the company side of hiring people, because a lot of people are leaving when the leadership is
Right.
changing over. There's no loyalty. And by the way, I'm going to get 15 to 20% more just to go to another company. Might as well do that, right?
Know him or her. I like working with them or I like working for them. I'm going to go there. Yeah, a lot of that happens. Interestingly enough, that's kind of like the unintended consequence of starting with the offshore initiatives. You remember when they were moving factories and manufacturing overseas, the mantra was, what's not, you know, I have nothing against you. It's just business. And the employees were hit by that. And then we went through the year 2000 event. And honestly, the tables turned. It was the employee that had the option to jump around. And then the employers were asking, well, why are you leaving? Where's your loyalty? So during all of these, and then you had a series of economic events where employees were laid off due to whatever the reason is, financial reasons, let's say. So we're at the point now where there's of there's not a lot of there's not a lot coming from a company that makes people want to be loyal to that company itself. I am loyal
Well,
to Eddie, right?
well, and I think those are somewhat of a, maybe we didn't make that explicit point, but their companies in general are not doing a whole lot to drive loyalty. I'm just going to be blunt. They're not. The other one is that I hear a lot is training. Often everybody talks about, or not every, a lot of people talk about training. I can't remember the last time I was trained. It might have been in the 90s,
Hmm.
early 2000s. I've never come into an organization truly. I'll take that back. When I worked at Volvo, there was some training, but it was one of those repetitive jobs that you were trained over a 1 week period. But it wasn't like a curriculum that we walked through. It was just like, let's jump into this and call it training. And if you're not training people, that's the beginning of losing loyalty. I'll say the other one too. And I'll say this because my wife is pretty much on a different gig every 3 months. There is nothing worse to destroy loyalty right out of the box than when you show up and they don't have your laptop ready, your forklift ready if you're working in warehouses, your truck ready if you're a truck driver. They're not ready to onboard you. And it's just this complete cluster. And you're like, yeah, I'm just another set of tires before they, bring the truck into the pit and swap
Well,
out more tires.
and I think that's an interesting example of just how companies have not progressed with the actual work environment.
Yeah,
Companies think, oh,
well
I've
put.
hired this person. Now he'll be around for a while, or now she'll be around for a while. And, what's the big deal if it takes a couple days to get the laptop? I like your point because there's really no excitement for a new person. It's more or less like a, hey, welcome to my nightmare. Come on in and do the drudgery, you know?
All right. So now we got the title of this episode. Welcome
Yeah,
to my nightmare.
yeah. There you go.
And then we want to turn around. Gen X wants to blame Gen Z why they're not inspired.
And then, and I'm over dramatizing, of course. And then you have the senior
Oh my
most
God.
leadership who are just in a completely different world. Well, what do you mean you're not going to be in the office every day?
No.
Which
Yeah.
the back to office initiative, I think a lot of people are looking at it, especially the younger generations. I think they're looking at it as they don't trust me.
Keep going. This is a golden nugget discussion point.
It's if I've got to go into, if according to you, I'm not working unless I'm in the office, the root cause of that is you don't trust me. You don't trust anybody. If you don't trust your employees, why should there be any loyalty from either side? And the result of it is that people don't, the sad thing is that people don't take that into account. They don't think about that. They don't think about, it's very few people that think about, if I do this little thing, to me, it's not a big deal. But to the new person, it's a big deal.
It is. And I think that's where you never get the loyalty. If you can't onboard somebody with some positivity, know that you're coming on a training program, something, you're already chipping away at that, right? And there goes the loyalty. And then to your point with remote work, no, you can't remote work now because essentially I'm saying that I don't trust you to do
Exactly.
your work, right?
Exactly.
And that is something that's a great segue into remote work, loyalty and advancement.
Hmm.
It is, you start off and they just throw you into stuff, right? And you and I've started up warehouses and stuff like that. And there's a big part of our job as project managers and program managers that you do just jump in and you make things work and your experience, but more your willingness and your grit to grind is something that is, I think, comes from your the parenting that you received, and then those leaders early in your career
Right.
showed you the benefits of your grit to grind.
Hmm.
And that is something that never leaves you. But if it was never inserted or helped you see the benefits of that, and it's just fragmented from day one, there goes your loyalty. And then, well, you can't remote work. What do you mean you don't trust me to do remote work? I think that's what
Yeah,
there's the piece in
exactly.
that part is not generational. That is just human shit. This sucks.
And it's not, here's the thing. It's funny. It truly is not personal. It doesn't even enter into their heads that this is, it's bad optics. I worked for a company a while ago quite a while ago. It was interesting. It was the only company that I ever worked at where the CEO of the company on Christmas Eve or the day before, the day before your holiday, he would literally walk through the office building, shaking everybody's hand and thanking them and wishing them a Merry Christmas. So to give you an idea of the change. Now, that's kind of like the elusive Christmas party. Nobody does that shit anymore. But still, it's the concept of, I think you hit the nail on the head. I was with that company and we started up a brand new 1,000,000 square foot distribution center. And it was a rough start. And this was in Chicago. And the EVP, you would call him the chief supply chain officer today, or the COO today. He came in to make sure that, to find out what was going on. And he would talk to everybody. He knew your name, which makes a huge difference. And then there was one time when it was in the football, the NFL season, he actually went down and hunted down a TV to put in a conference room so people could watch the football game. The difference now is they have no idea who you are. Leadership, and that's the common refrain. So all you have to do is pay
Yeah.
attention.
So, yeah, let me add to that. I've started up quite a few distribution centers or had massive technology overhauls on existing distribution centers since 2019 for two large companies. And what's consistent between those companies are things like you got to go through so much as a project manager to get approved for pizzas for the teams around the distribution center. So they have some food and they're
Right,
working extra hours.
right,
And I'm a team builder. I'll always be a team builder. And I always put money in the budget for things like let's make sure we have consistent food rolling through the DC so
right.
people are engaged and they're not running out and they're not having to run out and find food and all
Worry
that other
about
stuff,
that
but
as
they can
well.
still do that. Yeah, and the amount of scrutiny I get for putting that in the budget, and then when it goes to my expense report, I've often, I would say about a third of the time, I don't get paid back in my expense report for that money, even though it was in the budget. Even though we've probably spent $2,000 to $3,000 debating whether
Hmm.
that money should be in the budget. And
Hmm.
often that food money is taken out of the budget because they don't think that we should have it. And that drives against people's loyalty. If you're not willing to throw in some extra lunch food, stuff like
Right.
that during major implementations, just wears away at people's loyalty. All
Yeah.
right. Maybe
Yeah.
we're beating on the loyalty thing. And I could go on about the other side of it, on leadership side of it, frankly. I can see how they take things because of C-level management is beating on them for expenses.
Hmm.
And I can see where C-level people in such a hyper competitive economy have got to keep expenses down consistently. So that's the other side of the coin, right? This isn't
And
just
it depends on the
let's beat
market
on
you're
the
in.
companies.
It depends on your
What's that?
market. It depends on the market you're in. Like for instance, the retail environment is traditionally low margin and they have to worry about everything they spend. Where a software company, it's like, yeah, what the hell? You look at Google where they have their meals and everything, that kind of stuff. I don't know that anybody does that anymore, but those are the kind of things. And, I know for sure, that whole thing with having the support within the building close by so you don't have to go anywhere. The dry cleaning, the food, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that kind of stuff. All of that was by design because they knew that people were working ungodly hours over an ungodly number of days. And it was cheaper for them to do that than to increase the staff.
Yeah. And yeah, guys, again, this podcast is so much about just real speak and not just vanity talk. And so if people feel like we're being negative, no, we're being real.
Hmm.
And we're trying to explore or have discussions on both sides of the coin. And my point there is we talked about the leadership side. We understand why all of that is a challenge. Let's move on to just what leaders misunderstand about job hopping. I think One thing there as a get the wheels turning on that is how easy it is to actually job hop for just about anybody. And one thing I will say with that, even at the director and the VP level, how much job hopping they do, as well as people that actually do the work.
Yeah, a lot of times it's not even, you know, I have no idea what percentages are or anything like that, but I do know that there's an awful lot of kind of background silent recruiting that goes on with all of these social networks that you have now. You know, you get how many times do you get a notice, a message from somebody in LinkedIn that I have this position,
Yeah.
are you interested, or whatever the things are. So you get that, and then on top of that, I think you add the whole gig economy, and I've come to the conclusion that I believe that this type of employment is really turning towards the gig economy, which kind of addresses that. You're looking out for your career is yourself.
Yeah, your career is a business. If you don't treat it like a
Mhm.
business, you're gonna have a tough grind over the next 20 years.
Right,
But yeah,
exactly.
I think job hopping is a real thing. And I'll go back to my other point that if you want to make more than the 3 to 5% or the 10% to be a manager, and by the way, when you become a manager, it's about 10%. And then you go back to the 3 to 5%
Yep.
every year until
Right.
you become a higher manager like a director.
Right.
That's just the facts. And anybody in HR can argue with me in the comments or we'll have you on the show. But if you want 15 to 20% or better, you got to go job hopping. All right, let's move on to the next one.
All right. I
Technology
need to
as
take a
a
little break.
gener
I need to take a break, Teddy, before we get into the next topic.
already,
Right back.
no problem.
We are okay.
Anyways, yeah, the next subject is career technology as a generational translator. And one thing here is where tech actually bridges generational gaps versus where it creates new ones. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on the people. The wild card, I guess, would be the AI type technologies, but it's more or less the individual's comfort level with the technology. For instance, you have the older generations, just they're more comfortable with emails or talking than they are with texting, for instance. And that is just a ingrained habit. Whereas the younger generations have spent their entire lives texting and communicating through the social networks and electronically. So you've got that going on, and it can be difficult to bridge it. Honestly, I look at it as I try to be the first one to bridge that communication, whichever way people are comfortable. And the reason I do that is because I believe it demonstrates my willingness to work out a better way to talk to people or a better way to communicate. I'm not hung up on it's got to be this way or that way. It's more or less, what are you comfortable with? And we'll work into that. We'll work it out. We'll figure out how to, I'll take a couple steps towards you. You can take a step or two towards me. And between that time, we'll come up with a great understanding. But it takes somebody giving the first time.
Yeah, that's it. And that's not even generational. That's just human
It's human
need,
nature.
right?
The
In
technology,
a team.
yeah, the technology adds a layer of complexity to that.
Yeah. And I don't know that I'm gonna take a step back here. I listen to these kinds of conversations on YouTube and I don't think a question or a discussion point like this is so adamant or strong between like Gen X and Gen Z. And what's the next generational, like double A or out? No, it's alpha. Gen X is not that far behind in technology. I mean, I grew up with it. I am not behind it. And it might be because I've been in IT my whole career, but it isn't like the, the baby boomer gap to Gen X. It's definitely not that kind of gaps. Let's make sure we have that into perspective because if Gen X was what 1965 to 1980, something like that,
Right.
and
Right.
then Z millennials. There's two breakups there or breaks in there. But my point is I just don't see that there's a big gap between generations with technology. It's a little
Well,
different in how they
when
communicate
you
and
jump
operate. Go ahead.
generations, though, when you jump generations, though, it'll be a huge gap. When I talk to
Meaning just in the way you communicate or your ability to use it?
the technology and the practices, I remember talking to our youngest daughter, and I just started looking at Facebook, and she was 3 social networks past that. You
Well,
know,
that's right.
nobody uses that anymore. Nobody's on Facebook anymore. All right. So there is some, and then if you jump another generation, if I jump to Gen Z, whatever, that's where the gap comes into play. But it's not necessarily, I think you make a great point. It's not the technology, it's the way you've evolved to use the technology.
Yeah, I would say that. I just don't feel that there's a big gap.
No, no.
If the boomers were in the conversation or go ahead.
Well, I always like to say when I remember a time when there were no PCs. It wasn't even in the back of your mind. It was a big deal to have an electric typewriter.
Yeah, I
And
don't
then
remember that time. I'm 55,
and
I
the
don't remember that time.
laptop, and then the portable was about the size of a carry-on suitcase.
It was. I remember
You know?
my dad bringing one home from IBM because he worked for IBM,
Mhm.
and yeah, that thing weighed in about 60 pounds. Maybe
Yeah,
not that much, but
yeah. Oh, um it's the opportunity to use the technology now. It's pervasive, and that's what makes the difference. And I think people the last few years swung pretty far in one direction, and now there's a correction going on from that perspective. But then
yeah.
you're on top of that, this gig handling of people. It's the gig market. People are looking at work in a different way. I don't wanna be tied down to be working all of these hours and to have to travel and do this and do that. I work to be able to do some of the things I wanna do. Whereas when I went to work or you went to work, you work to kind of give yourself value.
Yeah. Yeah, let's move on to this other one. Why I'm in disagreement with this, but it alludes to generational stuff. Why many systems are built for leadership, not operators. And I think you got to decide what those systems are because, a WMS or a transportation management system, is that really for leadership? Either of those, I would say no. Those are for operators to make them more efficient. That is really not a generational thing, but is it for leadership? I don't think so.
Mhm.
It's still efficiency.
Uh,
All right. So that's kind of a lame point. Let's
yeah,
move past that.
yeah, yeah, I agree.
Still under technology. Early signals of where AI may remove friction instead in, instead of adding to it.
I think what we're seeing, I think is that as the again, it's a chicken and an egg. I think as we become more proficient in the practice and the technology, we will identify the ways to use it to make things better, make things easier. The whole idea of this sense and respond environment is alluring because right now I saw something interesting. It's moving from control towers to command centers. The control tower tells you, here's the delivery. And then all of a sudden, something happened to it and it's not going to arrive. This delivery is late, where the command center uses that type of information and determines a risk. And how can I identify when the risk increases? And how can I adjust to that to limit the risk? It's not that I'm going to eliminate a disruption or a break, but I want to reduce the impact of that. So and the I found for me the thing that is most descriptive is to look at this from a lowest cost provider, a just in time which means lowest cost, which reduces the number of suppliers to leverage your influence, to a demand. You're not looking at how do I meet the customer's demand. The lowest cost provider, the just in time, if you will, is a extremely brittle flow. If something breaks, you're done. You're toast. Whereas when you look at it from a focus on demand and a anti-fragile perspective, you actively look for suppliers or partners that can provide duplicate services. And then you keep that person, I think of it as warm. You have a main supplier and a secondary or a tertiary and all of that supplier. In order to maintain that, you have to be able to distribute the orders, not evenly, but at least in a manner that encourages these suppliers to remain current, if that makes sense. And then when there's
Yeah.
an issue, think of it this way. Yeah, I have the Suez Canal gets shut down, so now my shipments from Asia to Europe are delayed by going around Africa. So, in a type of resilient supply chain, you have another supplier that you can shift to that reduces the amount of time that it takes to fill your order to meet your customer demand. Does it make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of that is
I guess
reducing the friction, but the personal side, I don't really see it, frankly, unless, well, I could argue that you reduce friction by eliminating the the one-to-one phone calls, for instance. If I'm
well,
texting,
I look at it.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
If you're
When I
texting
look at
me,
AI,
if you're texting, it's not necessarily it's not at all a synchronous conversation, right? It's more of
yeah,
an
and
email.
that's where I think, that's where I think people get lost when we start talking about AI. Meaning, I don't think that people truly understand when AI comes into play with whether it's generational or not. You can't even call the generational thing yet. We're barely like really into the fruition of what AI is. But if you AI, if it doesn't have an LLM hooked to it with agents, you don't have AI. So when you're looking at just texting back and forth, there's nothing to do with AI there. Now, if you're reducing down AI because the LLM was like reducing the conversation and made things more accurate from other stuff up in the text or the chat, that would be different. But I just see like AI really brings other things to the table in the case of efficiency if people are consistently using it. And I don't care what it is. Now, if you take it inside the warehouse, AI, it benefits all generations because it creates routing that continually gets smarter for picks or
Mhm.
shipping or where to place pallets. Like AI is going to figure out how to route pallets on the dock
Right,
quickly, almost like turn by turn is for Google when you're driving down the interstate and there's
right,
a wreck
right.
and it whips you off on this exit. You go down that county road and you get back on. That is where AI just makes things more efficient in the warehouse or on the yard or your distribution channels, to your point, coming across the globe.
Mhm.
It can tell you and automatically notify you like, hey, consistently this route through the Suez Canal slows down because of geopolitical crap. It will figure that out and notify you, and you start having legit data when you know when it starts to slow, you got to go to the other manufacturer. And that's truly where
And there's
and
a
you don't have
trigger
to
point
wait.
that you said. Yeah.
All of those things. And so
Well,
sticking with the generation.
the challenge that we have right now with to be blunt, I think we're in that exuberance phase where everybody wants it and they don't know what it means. They just know that everybody else wants it. So, you know, they want to do AI, but they haven't looked at it. They don't know, as you point out, they don't know what's really bringing value and not bringing value. And third, and probably the most important, the AI initiative now, I think, is viewed, or up until now, has been viewed as a technology project. And so what happens then is that there's no real incentive for the business to sign on for it or to start to use it because here's another technology project where they're taking away everything that I've developed over the years to make my life easier. And so that's a big deal.
Yeah, this we may
Yeah,
digress
but
because
that's not
this is
generation.
a good. Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Let's digress a little bit or go off route for a minute because you and I talked about either this on the previous episode or a pre-podcast discussion,
Mhm, mhm.
and it had to do with the business needs to own this, not IT. when you talk about AI, which has nothing to do with generational stuff. It has to do with the business has to know its processes and know what is could be automated, which has nothing to do with IT. In other words, if you got repetitive tasks that people are doing, the business needs to know that and document it. And by the way, I'm going to argue this because I had this at the company you and I work for. I always argue this that the tools are out there. The business people can use them if they just go learn them. And I'm not talking about coding and all this other stuff. So I'm going to give you an excellent example. Make, N8N. All these are like business level tools that if business people learned how to use them, they wouldn't have to spend weeks and months, if not years, going to IT to implement a lot of stuff. I mean, reporting, things like that. And in the case of one, I'm getting to the point of AI, if the business part of these organizations would know their processes, know if they were continuously repetitive, they could go build a lot of their own AI stuff. Or if they would own it, they would be so much more quicker getting into IT. I should say more efficient, because this is AI is not a does not start with an IT discussion, and that's to your point, correct?
Right. Exactly. It's the business process. The thing that you have to be careful though with from the how you implement AI, because right now we have a very fragmented, disjointed flow. Purchase orders are created in SAP and the PO is sent to WMS. The receipt information is sent back to SAP, but but then if you want to forecast and track your inventory, it takes a week to update, something along those lines. So what you need to do is to make sure that you're actually adding value to that. And that's a different discussion. That's kind of a business process discussion, you know. And what
Oh, it is.
worry about is you have to be careful that we don't implement that whole siloed set of tools with the new technology. It's got to be flowing through. There's got to be, in order for this to actually bring value and allow you to really progress, you have to have an integration type of platform where you're able to actually pull data. You're actually able to load data without impacting the receiving system. You have to be able to send data without really impacting the receiving system, simply because we're getting into an era now of when you're working with new technology, the tools and capabilities shift frequently and dramatically. So a tool that you're using today to track shipments might not be available in a month. It's a startup. You're doing leading edge type things. The startup might have failed or they might have been acquired by somebody who kind of put a bullet in its head. So you have to have that. You have to have those connectors that I need to fill this information so that I'm not impacting anybody else. And as long as I get the information in this format, it will work. And I can turn you on in days rather than months. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
But
Well, I think we can leave it at that.
yeah, I know that's a different topic. It's a different discussion altogether, I think.
Yeah, with that said, let's move on to feedback, coaching, and conflict. Back to that generational engagement theme. Why feedback cadence expectations are completely different now. And, how often do you get feedback from your resource manager, and what is the cadence expectations on how often you should get that back? And I'll throw my point in here pretty quick is resource managers, even directors and above, they're hesitant to give any kind of negative feedback unless it's something that blew up like super bad
Yeah.
because of the era we're in. And the second one is the amount of work that it takes. If you call somebody out for doing poor work, they're going to scream victim.
Mhm.
They may or may not. But the next thing is this is what gets underneath my skin because this has happened probably 3 times in my career where I worked with a resource manager as a project manager. And it was just somebody that went from project to project and was just a boat anchor on the project. And finally, it was time to put him on a PIP.
Hmm.
And, when somebody hits the performance piece and you have to take them to HR and put them on a pill, oh my God, do you know how much work is added to that resource manager
Hmm.
and the project manager if it's project related? It is unbelievable how much more work you got to do with coaching and documentation and meetings,
Hmm.
all this stuff. So when it comes to that cadence expectation, does more feedback to your resource manager and the other way really matter? I think that's one question.
No, I think it needs to, but I do think it needs to be, it is a personal thing, not necessarily a practice, or there might be a general guideline rather than a practice. Whether you're more comfortable meeting every week, every other week, randomly, it all depends on the point, but it needs to be there. And it all depends on, you made an important point. If nobody's honest about this, then why are you even meeting?
Yeah. So I'm going to say this often the formal feedback time is in the first quarter of the new year, a lot of times, right? And you
Yes.
do performance reviews. And how many of these things have you been through? And I'm going to speculate, and in the audience, go ahead and comment. But 80% of the people or better are just pencil whipping that shit, and it's not real feedback. And one reason why is if you call somebody out in a negative manner, you just bought yourself a shit ton of work.
Yep.
Is
Yep.
that accurate?
That's that's a fair assessment. And so it behooves you, it is in your own self-interest to create a cadence that allows you to bypass that. I'm not going to allow the employee to get to that point where they're just kind of going along. They're not bringing value. But that requires honest conversations and regular communication. And you're right. A lot of people don't like to do that and it's exactly it. If I call this person out on performance, then I've got to write all of this up and keep track of it and it's a nightmare. So I'm going to be, it's very bland. There's no value to the process, really.
Yeah. So I think that the whole cadence and expectation is consistency is what we're landing on. And that's probably pretty difficult, especially if you have a mediocre performer. Or the next part under feedback and coaching, what coaching means to different generations. I I don't think there's much difference from generation to generation. Coaching's coaching, and is coaching really mentoring?
The best type of coaching would be mentoring, I think.
Sure. I don't think it's different from generation to generation.
No, I think people might have a different name for it. I don't know, but I think the activity is the same generation to generation. I do think that I would not be surprised if the later generations push back on that more than the earlier generations.
Yeah, no, I will say that because that's where they're at, right?
Hmm.
Or is it they're not going to be able to push back too much because all they're doing is not all, the majority of what they do is typing.
Hmm.
And a lot of stuff, if it's negative feedback, you don't want in writing.
Right, right. There's something there.
And
Yeah.
so that's, yeah. So I think there's not that much difference from generation to generation with coaching. It just might be different whether you're typing it or talking it. The next and last one for feedback is how conflict avoidance is quietly killing performance.
Yep.
Go ahead, Tom.
That's an easy one, right? I look at it this way. The manager, the higher up in the organization, the hierarchy you go, the less you know about what's going on the ground with the individual contributors, right? And so, the hardest part about all of this is to maintain that open communications with them. And you have to show interest and you have to take the time and it's your responsibility to take that time to keep it open. Cause it's kind of like coaching. If you keep that open and so if you keep that area, that lane of communication open, the chances increase significantly that you will hear about negative things or positive things that people don't bring up. Hey, I could do a better job if so and so did this a little bit differently. Well, what do you mean by that? Okay, so all right, so if instead of using email, they texted you, you feel like you could really it would help you. All right, well, let's talk to them, and and you try not to put anybody on the spot, right? But it's a way to get, maybe that turns into a coaching discussion. But you gotta, how do you measure differently? I'm not sure because it's all kind of all blended in.
Well, I think it's our era of conflict avoidance. For most people, they do everything to avoid conflict. And that's, you know, this, that's not my personality. It's something that I don't mind the conflict if it gets us to a resolution or an agreement of boundaries quicker. Let's
Mhm.
just talk about it. I'm not here to win. I'm here to get a win-win so we can all move forward quickly. But what hinders that is people's conflict avoidance. Like, here's a great example that I watch or listen to a lot. I'll be saying something in a meeting or one on one, and I'm looking for a yes or a no.
Or
Those
any
are two simple
response.
answers.
Yeah.
Well, and I get a giggle.
Hmm.
And the giggle, I mean, it's sort of like saying, "Well, let's go do this. When do you want to do it?" And I get a giggle, and it's like that is conflict avoidance because you don't want to say no. I don't want to do that, and that is a lot of the norm we do now. Instead of just getting down to brass tacks and moving, and then somebody throws up, "Oh, that's being harsh," or harm flag, and I'm just like, dude, you stay over there in your little part of the freaking sandbox, and we're going to go over here and we're going to get some shit done.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. I
Enough on
think
that.
that
We'll move to
I
this
think that's
last.
fair. I think that's fair.
Yeah. Let's move on to the last one. What leaders can do Monday morning? I mean, what is a call to action here? One thing leaders should stop doing immediately. And it's going to dovetail off of what I was just talking about. I think what leaders need to stop doing immediately is being scared of, maybe you don't want to call it scared, not quick to do or kick the can down the road. Quit pacifying or kicking cans down the road called poor performer employees. Get into it with
They're not
HR if you
comfortable
have
with
to, because
managing. Yeah, they're not comfortable managing conflict.
that's my whole point. And they got to come up with a more efficient way to correct performance with using HR as a non biased third party, so to speak, and get on with something that does not hinder the resource manager.
Hmm.
I think that's good advice. We both agree upon that, right?
Yep, I agree with that. I agree with that. That's the
And then one thing they should do to measure differently, let's stick with either performance or how does a resource manager measure differently to work with different generations? You may be the younger manager, right? To work with an older generation or somebody that's 10 or 15 years older than you. How do you measure that differently? That's a confusing
yeah.
topic, but go ahead, Tom.
Yeah,
Take a whack
it's
at it.
well, I'm somebody that wants to look at this always from the value perspective. What do you get out of it? This is what I'm confused with, or this is what I need to do. How do we get there? Kind of a thing. It's a collaborative perspective rather than a control perspective, command and control perspective, if you know what I mean. So by measuring, I think that it's a matter of the boy, I don't know. I don't know. It's difficult to measure personal communications. I think what I would do actually from a measurement is really, the old adage of management by walking around. It's just a good idea to go around and, press the flesh and say hi to people. You don't have to ask them what's going on or anything like that. Or the thing that I like, taking it from the agile practice, I like to have a brief stand up in the morning. Where are we at? These are the things that we're supposed to be doing this week. Are we on track? If we're not, what do you need to get on track? What's the impact and how can I help you? You know, give
Yeah,
it a
well, I was gonna stick in there, Tom, how do you press the flesh if your whole
remotely.
team is up and down the East Coast,
Yeah.
remotely and things like that? And it's gonna be to your point, that scrum meeting every morning for 15, 20 minutes, everybody gets and everybody gets on the friggin' camera. That dynamic of seeing each other, I don't care whether you got makeup on or a hat or pajamas, I need to look at you. We need to look at each other.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
agree.
in a daily 15 minutes together. I don't care if you're in Pluto or California or North Carolina. If we're
Mhm.
seeing each other 15 or that's enough. That's like sitting in a cube or an office next to somebody because you're working through your day, to your point. You're getting the how are we doing for the week? What do you need? And the other part is getting a culture of help. Our number one thing here is to help each other.
Right.
Not let me go throw the monkey over on your side because that is
Exactly.
your lane. And I say this on projects all the time. There isn't a lane. We're a whole team in the same sandbox at the same
Mhm.
table. We help each other, and that's our culture.
Well, and it's,
And
that is a very simple thing with very powerful and broad consequences because you're not only are you're developing the culture to perform, if you will, but you're developing a social structure. How we are a team, how do we talk to each other? What's our common goals and what are our, you know, what are the rules of the road when I'm talking to Teddy? And then the third thing, which is probably more, which is at least as important, it's that interaction allows me to share my experience that might be have a positive or negative impact on what you're struggling.
yeah,
in.
and well, this is on my head about remote work. I think the destructive part of going back to the office is you're saying, I don't trust you, but you're also giving up one of your biggest competitive advantages that an organization could have. And that is being able to recruit across major regions and build really good teams at probably a lower price because you're going to have more resources to select from than trying to control people, assuming that they're just socially walking together and around the office, around the water cooler, down at the little cafeteria or the vending machine. I think that is naive to think that that's going on. That is, it's not happening. I can tell you, I'm in and out of so many companies, and I have
Right.
so many conversations with people that that's just rose colored glasses that is really not helping. It
Hmm.
really isn't. What does help is allowing people to work remotely, getting strong resources that are from all over. You're going to get more diversity. You're going to get more diversity thinking, you're going to get more diverse ideas. And then the last piece is what person doesn't want to work remote? And they will savor you just doing that drives loyalty
Right.
because so many people went back to the office and it's proven how there is no loyalty that the company has for the employee, but to force them back there where if you're able to stay remote, that's a big chunk of loyalty right there. It's the
Right.
managers that can effectively get good performance out of those remote workers that is a huge competitive advantage.
Absolutely.
Well, I think I just had
Absolutely.
my closing statement. I
There
think
you
that was
go.
a closing statement for me.
Yeah. I think that puts a nice bow around it.
Yeah, I usually go, "Hey, let's start landing this plane," but I think I just flopped it on the runway.
Yeah. We're
Should we
there.
should we leave it at that, Tom?
I agree. I agree. Well, let's take a look at the video and see if it needs anything.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and stop it here. Oh, one thing, let me just in closing to the audience, we really appreciate your time. Hopefully, you got some good insights out of this. We're at the hour and 10-minute mark, but I will put the chapters of our discussion points in there so you can jump to those points. But once again, thank you for your time. Tom, any closing remarks?
No, I didn't save anything in reserve.
You put it all on the field, the
Yep.
table.
Yep.
All right, with that said, thank you very much. Don't go anywhere, Tom.
You're listening to Supply Chain Unlocked. Get exclusive insights from industry leaders on overcoming